Testing. All right, we got the 1 minute countdown.
Okay, thanks.
Probably the beginning of next week. I have not a lot of people today.
Hey, John.
Is there a potluck?
All right, are we? We're on. Okay. Hello, happy Sabbath, everyone. Yeah, all the crowds here, for all you people joining in online, you're missing out because, but it's a good thing you're watching because it's like standing room only. Pretty soon it will be. Anyway, happy Sabbath, everyone. What a beautiful day it is. Our thoughts, our prayers are going with our pastor Sam Ganglu, who's in Australia for 3 Sabbaths. So we're really going to miss him. But he's been invited to speak out there, and then he's going to tack on a much-needed vacation in the Outback. So we hope that he has a wonderful time, and we're very blessed to have some guest speakers. I say guest, but Dr. John Griffin is going to be our speaker today. He's no guest, but we're certainly happy to hear how the Spirit has moved him to preach the word today. We are also going to have special music. It's led out by our very own Aiden Lee, and he has recruited some of his family members. What did I say? Special music? No, praise. Praise is going to be. It's going to be very special. It's going to be music, but it's going to be the praise by Aiden Lee and his sister and his dad. So, really happy to be worshiping together with you today. And I'll hand it over to the praise team.
I think you're supposed to talk. Am I
am?
supposed to talk?
Okay, well, this first song is Build
say
My Life.
something and inspire us.
This is Build My Life.
Inspired.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring.
next song is Overwhelmed. I see the work of your hands, galaxies spinning a heavenly dance, oh God, all that you are, so overwhelming. I hear the sound of your voice, all at once is a gentle and thundering noise, oh God, all that you are, so overwhelming.
I delight myself in you, captivated by your beauty. I'm overwhelmed by you. God, I run into your arms, unashamed because of mercy. I'm overwhelmed by you.
I know the power of your love, forgiven and free, forever you'll be my God. All that you done is so overwhelming.
I delight myself in you, in the glory of your presence. I'm overwhelmed by you. God, I run into your arms, unashamed because of mercy. I'm overwhelmed by you. You are beautiful, oh God. There is no one more beautiful. You are beautiful, God, you are the most beautiful. You are wonderful, oh God. There is no one more wonderful. You are wonderful, God, you are the most wonderful. You are glorious, oh God. There is no one more glorious. You are glorious, God, you are the most glorious. I delight myself in you, in the glory of your presence. I'm overwhelmed by you. God, I run into your arms, unashamed because of mercy. I'm overwhelmed by you. I'm overwhelmed by you.
Thank you, praise team, Lee family. morning, East Side. That sounded good. It is a good morning. The sun is out. It's cooled off a bit in the last week. It's not as smoky as it was. And it's definitely feeling like fall. Kids are in school, and things are settling down. I'm John Griffin. I am not a pastor, a proctologist by trade. So that's how bad things have gotten here at Eastside, I guess. Sorry, guys. Anyway, I'm going to start my sermon with PowerPoint here, and we'll transition a bit. We're going to talk about borders to some degree. Well, first and foremost, we're going to talk about Jesus. And I think that's what Sabbath is for me and your life as a Christian should be. But we're going to talk about Jesus and borders. We're going to talk about thankfulness and gratefulness. We're going to talk about faith and righteousness. And ultimately, what's involved with godliness and what God can do for us to make us better people. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this Sabbath. Thank you for this church. Thank you for its members. And thank you for their families and the communities they interact with. Be with us with this service. Be with me. Help my words to be your words. And help us to be able to take what we learn and with your Spirit take it out to our communities to further your word and your cause in the rest of this world. In your name, amen. All right. Any lepers in the audience? Marvin said spiritual lepers. He's already getting on to what I was going to talk about to some degree. All right. Obviously no lepers as we know it. But think about lepers in the Bible. Specifically named lepers, and you can call it out. I talked to Sam before we did the service, and I told him I was wanting to do more of a liturgical service where people would be standing and sitting and kneeling and singing and praying and then listening to a sermon. And we used to go to liturgical services with the Lutheran school that my children went to early on in grade school. And Jody's comment was, well, there's no way you could ever fall asleep with one of their services because they always have you moving around. I'm not going to be that bad, but I do want to be at least somewhat interactive. And so you've had a couple minutes to think. Who are the named lepers in the Bible, i.e. lepers that have names? I heard a Simon. I heard a Miriam. Naaman. 3 so far? I'll give you a hint. There's 2, 4, 6, 7. Uzziah, good one. There's about 7. I won't torture you too long. Yeah, Miriam. All right, here they are. Actually, Moses, this surprised me because I would not have thought of him as a leper at all. But remember, God had him stick his hand in his cloak, and it came out leprous. And then he obviously healed him. Miriam later on. Naaman, yes, but don't forget about Gehazi, the servant that took advantage of Naaman, basically. Joab was David's right-hand man for a long time until he killed Abner. And then, I don't know that it was directly Joab, but it was his family that was cursed with leprosy. But his name is associated with it. Uzziah, we already mentioned, was one of the kings of Israel. And then Simon in the New Testament is the only named leper. So you guys are doing great, a little bit of interaction. Let's talk a little bit about leprosy. Today we call it Hansen's disease, and it's a very specific disease. Back in the day, as in the New Testament and Old Testament, it was very much a catch-all phrase for anything bad that happened to your skin. And you got to remember, the Israelites, once they left Egypt, spent 40 days in the desert before they got to Canaan. this was a big problem because you didn't want any contagious skin diseases going from one tent to the other and eventually the whole community. And so there were some very specific laws about leprosy in Leviticus 13 and 14, which is my next slide, but I'm not ready to go there yet. But the Greek word, well, the word leprosy comes from the Greek word lepra, which means scabs and peeling. The Jewish word is zerat, or something like that. And that means just skin disease, so it's more of a general term. But it has an underlying meaning that I thought was very interesting, because it also means to smite, as in smitten by God. And we certainly see leprosy and skin diseases as something that has some underlying connotations to it often. It's interesting in medical school. I have a little bit more than just the 20 minutes Sam promised me. But in medical school, you go through all the classroom training, and then you start doing the rotation stuff, kind of 2 years and 2 years. And so the buzz among all the medical students was, dermatology. That's kind of the one to get into. You can not only be a dermatologist, you can be a pathologist. It's pretty lucrative. It's got 9 to 5 hours, no emergency calls. And so, I think in the back of a lot of our heads, it's like, yeah, well, dermatology. Until we got to class. And, I'm sitting there with my 2 friends, and they're going through one slide after another. And I'm pretty sure it was about 12 slides into some of the worst looking lumps and bumps you've ever seen on anyone's skin. And I look over to my friend, and he's looking over at me at the same time, and we both shake our head. And at that point, literally 5 minutes into a lecture, we knew we were not doing dermatology. So, it's a very physical disease with an outward manifestation of sickness, but it also has some underlying, significance. Think about diseases we have today that have underlying meanings. Obviously, we were coming out of an epidemic with COVID, and that's interesting because look at this. Leviticus 13 and 14 talks about regulations regarding defiling skin diseases and cleansing from them. And that's right after what to do with a pregnant woman when she's delivered, and right before they talk about molds. So I don't know if there was any specific reason it was in that order, but there were very strict regulations having to do with this, to the point where anyone with such a disease must wear torn clothes, let their hair be unkempt, and then cover the lower part of their face. Does that sound familiar? And cry out, unclean, unclean, so that everyone knows. There really isn't a social distancing mandate that comes along with Leviticus 13 and 14, but the understanding was at least 6 to 8 feet, but it did make a difference as to whether you were upwind or downwind. And then the other things that went along with it that did come from Leviticus 13 and 14 was that they remained unclean until a priest went through the cleansing ritual, which, by the way, also included sacrifices for your sin. So there was always a little bit of this, you have this disease, what kind of sin caused the disease? And we know a little bit better now, but I think maybe not as much as we'd like. They had to live alone, i.e. they couldn't live with their families, and they had to live outside the camp, which eventually in Canaan became outside the cities. But an unfortunate law of life is that common ailments attract people that otherwise would not be attracted. So you had what they called these leper colonies, or groups of lepers that would support themselves. And so this is moving on to borders to some degree, but I wanted to go back to my last question, which was, what kind of diseases do we deal with these days that have underlying connotations? We certainly saw the COVID epidemic become very political, and it's in a lot of ways helped to divide this country. But there's other diseases. You guys remember the AIDS epidemic in the 80s? I mean, a lot of it was just not knowing what was going on, and I'm sure a lot of that had to do with leprosy in the past. But even more recently, I was surprised, monkeypox has come along. A lot of the same social and sexual stigmatizations that go with both of those diseases have come along recently. So it's a real thing. It was a real thing back then, and it's a real thing now. Don't forget also the religious part of this, because there is that underlying thought, even with monkeypox and AIDS, that maybe something was going on, maybe these people had some control over it, maybe it could have prevented, and maybe with a better lifestyle and a more godly lifestyle, it wouldn't have happened. I'm not saying that's true. Keep that in the back of your head. Samaritans in the Bible. Who are the named Samaritans in the Bible? Mr. Good. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, throw out the unnamed Samaritans. Who? Women at the well? Yeah, it's kind of a trick question because there is the Good Samaritan, there is the woman at the well, Jacob's well, which was in Samaria, by the way. And then there was this leper that got healed with 10 other people and came back to Jesus. So it's interesting because you got a bunch of Jewish people writing books in the New Testament that don't even know the names of any Samaritans. So where did Samaritans come from? It's interesting because they came from Rehoboam, which was the son of Solomon. Remember, he was the one that came after Solomon, and the question was, are we going to be a united kingdom or not? Rehoboam made some decisions that divided the kingdom, which meant 10 of the tribes went north, and the other 2, I think it was Judah and Benjamin, stayed south. And so it was these northern Israelites that were already separated from the rest, from all 12 tribes, that were not deported when the captivity came along. So they stayed home. But the Assyrians, as part of the captivity, intermixed them with other nations that were conquered, to the point where these people started marrying and intermarrying and having kids, literally mixed breed kind of kids, so it wasn't the pure Israel that it had been at King David's time and before. They also, Samaritans, from their point of view, were the true religion of the ancient Israelites because they followed Moses and his writings, which was the Pentateuch, very strictly. They did not include other writings, which limited them to some degree, but also made them kind of feel self-righteous, like they maybe had an upper hand against the others. They used Mount Gerizim as their holiest place to worship. Mount Zion came about initially with Eli, as in Samuel's priest, that started using Mount Zion, and they thought that that was wrong because it should be Mount Gerizim because Moses was the one that designated that as the Mount of Blessings. Remember the Mount of Blessings, the Mount of Curses? Anyone know the name of the Mount of Curses? Ebal, if I remember right, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. Who would you consider Samaritans today? Trick question, and be careful. There's not a right or wrong answer, but there are groups of people that are somewhat despised in some people's eyes, and it's interesting because it's different for different people. I'm not going to have you shout out any names, but the Jews saw it very differently. They saw the Samaritans as people that were led astray, that started their own religion, including their own temple and own sacrificial system that included 2 golden calves that were set up so that people in the northern kingdoms didn't have to come to Jerusalem to worship at the Jewish temple. And in a lot of ways, because of this, Samaritans were despised even more than pagans that didn't know God. And so I'm kind of setting the scenario for what we're going to be talking about. Luke 17. Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourselves to the priest." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back, praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." So Luke, I like Luke, one of the 4 Gospels. Not a disciple, not an apostle, a physician that followed around. What I like even more is he's the one that came after the fact to talk to people that knew disciples and apostles and that knew Jesus. And he came along afterwards to document, kind of like an investigative reporter. He also wrote the book of Acts. So just a little bit of background. And we can go to the next slide. The place was Israel. I'm not sure if this is lighting up as well. But it talks about Jesus is going to Jerusalem from Galilee along the border with Samaria. So we just talked about Samaria. So what's a little weird, and I don't have a good answer for it, is Samaria was the northern kingdom, and Judah and Benjamin were south. Then what's the deal with Galilee? And it's obviously by the Sea of Galilee, that upper one. This lower one is the Dead Sea. I don't have an answer for that. But Jesus was along that border. He had been there before. We can go to the next slide. There are 2 ways to get to Jerusalem from Galilee. One is the short way, not as safe, but that is right through Samaria, like you saw on the map. The other way is to go the long way, and that's around Samaria. Obviously much safer, but it's the difference between 1 day and 2 days travel. Jesus traveled along the border. He'd been to Samaria before. We know about the woman at the well. And he'd obviously talked about Samaritans to the point where he was talking about the Good Samaritan. And the Jews really only believed the only Good Samaritan was a dead Samaritan. So it wasn't safe, but he was there. And so the question is, why was he there? And I think the answer is because there was a border there, and a lot of things happen at a border. Have you heard anything about borders lately? Shout it out. The wall. Where else? There's a war, right? Yeah. And then there's these border states, Texas and Florida, that hit the news. Not sure what's going on there, but it's interesting. Things happen at the border that don't happen anywhere else. So real quick, in the spirit of a liturgical service, I want everyone to stand up. And if you have crossed a border in the last day, sit down. So some people just sat down and back. And we're talking international borders. So international borders. So part of my family was up through Canada up to Alaska, a lot like this, interestingly enough. All right, anyone crossed a border in the last week? In the last month? In the last year? Anyone who went to Bolivia crossed a border? How about 2 years? 3 years? 5 years? Some of you people need to get out a bit. Now, granted, COVID has made that a little bit more difficult. But in a lot of ways, borders are places of need. And you can see that. You mentioned the wall. It's a border that's separating people that are in desperate need. They have a political system that is not well, and it's driving people to poverty and to desperation. They're willing to sacrifice their life to cross a border and come to a country that has freedom and the ability to live the American dream, whatever that is. We have a border in Russia and the Ukraine. It's a political move with wealthy people trying to gain more property and power that has created a desperate situation that has involved the whole world in helping people out. I was talking to my wife about it, but there are other borders. There are social borders where there's upper and lower class people. There are wellness borders. There are people that are sick and there are people that are well. And we went downtown to pick up my family this morning, and you could see the camps of homeless people. Talk about another group of people that, because of their individual needs, stick together to help each other out. There are borders. There's people that live in houses and people that don't live in houses. There are all kinds of borders. And the interesting thing with a Samaritan is, based on his nationality, he didn't get to choose that border. It is what he is. How many of you feel like you were born in a time and place where you had no control and you just do the best that you can? So no choice. He was just a Samaritan. Jesus had a choice, though. He was choosing to risk his life, potentially, taking the unsafe route along the border, because that's where people of need were. So those three texts at the bottom there, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, talk about Jesus saying almost the exact same thing, almost word for word. It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. And so you don't find sick people in our day and age, outside the hospital. You see them more in the hospital. Now, that's not totally true. But Jesus was going out of his way where the lepers were, where the Samaritans were. All right. And he was heading to a village. There were 10 men with leprosy. Jesus has healed other lepers, and I'm guessing that these lepers knew that. Word travels fast. And these, in 3 of the Gospels, he talks about actually touching the leper. If you're willing, you can heal me. And Jesus touches the leper, which is a big no-no, because it makes them unclean. So you got lepers that are unclean, you got Samaritans that are unclean. And so they turn around and they start heading out, and this one leper turns back. So I have 6 questions, and then we're wrapping up. It takes me about 10 minutes at this point, and there is lunch afterwards. 1, what is the significance of the Samaritan? And why is he mentioned where he is mentioned? And he was a Samaritan. Why is this significant? Does Luke put it in as an afterthought? It seems that the story stands alone even without the Samaritan. I mean, it was a healing of a terminal disease, essentially. But it seems important enough that he points it out, and I think he does for a reason. It just seems like he forgot to mention it at the beginning, like 10 men who had leprosy met him, and one was a leper. Would have made more sense to me. But then it also leads me back to the beginning, where we see that Jesus traveled along the border, the area of needs, lepers' needs, Samaritans' needs. Who knows? Certainly other people's needs, but at the same time, he travels on the borders for my needs, and I like this. Where would we be without Jesus traveling along the borders, finding me in my needs? Second question, why does a leper not speak? We don't know. He does thank Jesus after he throws himself at Jesus' feet, but he otherwise does not speak, and we really do not even know what his thank you was later in the story. In a lot of ways, it was more a glorifying of God than a thanking of him. He was certainly thankful and grateful, and we're going to get back to that. What is the difference between being thankful and grateful? 3, when does he return to Jesus? Work with me. I am working my way backwards through the story. He does not throw himself at Jesus' feet until he returns. When does he return? Obviously, after Jesus said to him, "Go, show yourselves to the priest," and after he is healed. But, and this is amazing to me, a Samaritan has no priest to show himself to. Think about it. Who is allowed in the temple? Jews. Not even the women. They have a special courtyard for the women, and then even a more special courtyard for non-Jews. Certainly not a Samaritan, and certainly not a leper. I can see this guy obeying Jesus with the other 9 because he is a part of the leprosy group. But then on the way to Jerusalem, ahead of Jesus, by the way, who is heading to Jerusalem, all of a sudden realizing, what am I doing? I can't present myself to the priest. I can't even enter the temple. I am unclean. I am not only a leper that is unclean, but also a Samaritan that is unclean. Doubly unclean. I am despised by all Israel, including its priests. They, the priests, would literally rather have a pagan in the temple than me. Sadly, he is no longer a part of the leprosy group, the physically unclean, but he is also no longer a part of the Samaritan group, which is only slightly better than the leprosy group, but he has no connections at this point in his life. So 4, why does he return? Well, I already partially answered that question, to get the cleansing that he could not get with the priests. And then Luke also partially answers the question, to thank Jesus. The cleansing from the priest was more than just a cleansing from the leprosy. It was a cleansing from his sins. And so the leper went back to Jesus to show himself to Jesus as his priest. And Jesus not only gave him the cleansing he wanted from the leprosy, but also from his sins. Jesus is our priest. And he is the priest for all groups, lepers and Samaritans. He is the priest that is willing to be on the border for everyone. For lepers, for Samaritans, for pagans, for Jews, for you and for me. It points me to Hebrews, which earlier this year we went through the quarterly, the book of Hebrews, in detail. And it pointed out that Jesus is our high priest. Turns out he's also our temple. He is the embodiment of our laws. And he is love, which is what supersedes all the laws. He loves us, he cleanses us, he saves us. The Jesus that is in Revelation is the one that is going to be cleansing us as our priest for all times when he returns, to take us to a new earth and a new life on that new earth. 5, what is the significance of the 1 out of the 10 returning? This gets us to gratefulness, thankfulness and gratefulness. I do believe that the other 9 were healed in the story and cleansed by the priest, but it was the 1 that returned to thank him that was truly made well. When do we thank God? You can change the slide, by the way. When do we thank God? Not enough. It may be old-fashioned, but I still like to pray over my meals and thank God for my food. I also like to thank God for my day and how it went. But the Samaritan showed that he was not only thankful, but that he was grateful. What's the difference? Being grateful is not only recognizing something done for you, but also taking action in return based on recognizing that something's been done for you. It is a step up from being thankful, and it is a step that requires action. Action on our part. Our God is a God of action, and he calls us to action as well, especially if it is to glorify him, but also if it is to love others. I think it is important to thank God for things in life, both small and great. Speaking for myself, life can get busy, so busy that I am often just trying to get through the day and do not have time to reflect and be thankful, let alone grateful for the many blessings I have in life. Thanking God for small things helps me to not forget to thank God for the big things too. In the same way, going to God for the small things helps me to remember to go to God for the big things when I am just barely hanging on and things aren't going well. Last question. What is the significance of your faith has made you well? It is hard to see a lot more faith in the Samaritan compared to the other 9. I mean, they all did turn around and go towards Jerusalem to get the cleansing from the priest, especially initially. Jesus seemed to recognize in the Samaritans returning and him giving praise to God, this as an act of faith. Not only being thankful, but also being grateful, glorifying God, He is recognizing it as a righteous act of God and a godly act. This is interesting. The word for righteousness in Hebrew has two forms. One is a masculine form and one is a feminine form. And you see this in the Hebrew word when it's written and you're reading it, but you lose it in the English translation. It is unfortunate because there is a subtlety to this that is interesting to this story and may help us with why the Samaritan returned and why his faith made him well. The masculine form of righteousness is the righteousness that God gives to us. We are not able to obtain it on our own. It is a gift to us even though we are sinners. It is a gift of love from God. But it moves us to love others. And this is the feminine form of righteousness. It moves us to love others that we would not, in our otherwise sinful and selfish states, love. I believe this is what happened to the heart of the healed Samaritan, the Samaritan that returned. It does not seem to have happened in the hearts of the other 9, but who knows? I don't know. They were presumably thankful. I mean, you had to be thankful for getting cured. But the Samaritan was grateful enough that he returned to thank Jesus, to thank his God. The Samaritan acted on it, and that's what made the difference. And I think we should too. I understand that thankfulness and gratefulness do not entirely separate the godly from the ungodly, the worldly, whatever you want to consider the opposite of godliness. But I think faith and righteousness do. And it is often noticeable to others when they see it in our lives. I believe it takes a faith from God and God's righteousness above and beyond anything in ourselves to lead us into godly acts that separate us from others, especially in this world that has so much sin and suffering in it. It does maybe make us more thankful when good things happen, to have this faith from God and his righteousness. It also should make us more grateful, day in and day out, whether things are going well for us or not. Maybe that is where we should all start today, here at Eastside. With a little more faith in God and a little more willingness on our part to accept his righteousness, to lead us to be more righteous to others, to reach out to them, and to take that risk and enter some of those borders that we normally wouldn't be part of. Even if we're coming into contact with lepers, Samaritans, Jews, even if they are on the borders of our lives, because God did it for us, and we see it in the story with Jesus, we should do it for others. Thank you.
Please stand for a last song.
Caught up in your presence, I just wanna sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment, never wanna leave. I'm not here for blessing, Jesus, you don't know me anything more than anything that you can do. I just want you. just want you. Nothing else, nothing else, nothing else will do. I just want you. Nothing else, nothing else, nothing else will do. I just want you. Nothing else, nothing else, nothing else will do. I just want you. Nothing else, nothing else, nothing else will do. Caught up in your presence, I just wanna sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment. I never wanna leave. Oh, I'm not here for blessings. Jesus, you don't owe me anything more than anything that you can do. I just want you. So I think we're going into announcements now. Sorry.
Before we have the closing prayer, just want to draw your attention to the very last slide that John had up there. I don't know whether you caught that or not, but his closing slide said, "Happy Sabbath, all you grateful Eastside lepers." Right? Earlier on, John asked, "Are there any lepers in here?" And I said, "Spiritual leper. That's me." When you think back in your spiritual journey, right, there's that moment of recognition that whether you're beset by physical illness or trouble, financial, personal, emotional, we are all spiritual lepers. Right? We're born into sin. And were it not for the redemptive love of our Savior, Jesus Christ, we would live and die as spiritual lepers. But because he laid down his life for us, right, there's hope, and we can be healed of our spiritual leprosy and someday be glorified, not just in body, but in mind and spirit as well. So really our vision for Eastside, right, that there's room at the table and that we are his hands and feet to invite people to his kingdom table is an act of gratefulness, right? We don't do it out of guilt or out of obligation, but because we recognize that we were spiritual lepers, but we were healed. And by that faith, we're made well, not just physically, but spiritually as well. So thank you so much, John, for the message. Pretty good for a proctologist. With that, let's have a closing prayer, and then there's some announcements, and we're going to lead off by a personal announcement from Jesse Lee. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time to worship you, where we see that Jesus came to heal, and he did in so many marvelous and miraculous ways, but he cares so much more about the heart, because the heart is where eternity lies. And he desires, Lord, that we would all be reunited with him in eternity. So thank you for that message. Thank you for the path that you put Eastside on to be a bunch of grateful spiritual lepers who've been healed and want to share that good news with others. We love you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Okay, hi. So my name's Jessie. I'm going to be going on mission pretty soon to Bangladesh in a couple weeks, I think. We're waiting for my other visa. But I'm excited to go. I'm going to be working at an orphanage of 160 kids about. And, well, I was just, if you guys have the resources, money available, I would love if you guys would donate some small toys like bubbles, chalk, preferably not big stuffed animals, just because that'd be hard to carry, but, you know, stickers, anything like that, that'd be super great. Just reach out to me here, or you know my dad, so reach out to him too. And if you guys have money, I need to raise technically $2,000, but I'm just gonna take out a pocket as of now. So if you guys are willing to donate, that's also super awesome. So yeah, thank you.
All right, let's give Jesse a big hand. You know, not only do we as a church go on our annual mission trip, but it just warms my heart when I see our collegiates decide to take a stand for the Lord and not and do more than simply a week out of their lives, but maybe a whole year, 6 months. Let's also keep Mandy Rowe in our prayers as she's in Bolivia at an orphanage with some pretty rough living conditions. Hopefully she doesn't catch physical leprosy there while she's there. So we've got some announcements. Midweek lift. If you need that lift in the middle of the week, it's very easy. Just call in. You can share your praises and your prayer requests with your Christian family. Worship night. I thought that already happened. Yeah, that's an old slide. We can fast forward that. Sabbath school, so in case you didn't see it in the newsletter, very important, now all of the children's and youth Sabbath school is in person rather than online. So come at 10:30. We're asking the parents and the families to really support this, right? Because the teachers work hard, right, to prepare a really good lesson through the week. And it can be a little discouraging, right, if we don't have a robust participation. So, you know, it's one of the most important blessings we can impart to our children. So please make a special effort to bring your kids at 10:30 every week. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And I think everyone knows about the pickleball. Oh, tonight, 7:30. Contact my brother, George Lee. To do that. That's always great fun. Well, what was that? Were you doing a lunge? No, actually I remember that. You almost split your shorts lunging for that ball. And you can tell she did not make it because it's behind her, right? But a very great effort. These are fun pictures. For sure, pickleball's been very popular, so we're glad that it's back online tonight. Joe?
Just last time it was supposed to be from 7 to 10. Nobody showed up until 7:30. It's kind of like typical Korean time, I guess. So I decided to do it at 7:30 to 9 because they technically close at 9. And then also it kind of cuts down on the rental as well. So we do have 2 courts. And so if those who are interested come, but even though it's 7:30, I did that mainly because I thought it was sundown at 7:30, but I checked today, actually sundown is at 7, but it's okay, I already reserved it for 7:30. So I'd like you to do this. For those of you who are interested, I will have a quick show of hands. It was a blast. You can see how many people showed up last time. If you can show up at 7:15, at the parking lot, we can have a short stretch, a quick sundown worship, and then we can hit right in to the pickleball at 7:30 till 9, and we may be able to sneak maybe past a few minutes past 9 o'clock. But for those of you who want to come, whether you're experienced or not, come, because it's about fellowship, it's about building a little sweat, and if you don't know, we teach you on the spot. We had a bunch of, like, half the people there were newbies, and I myself have only gone out like 4 times. So if we can do it, you can do it as well. If you want a little bit of sundown activity, do that. Cost-wise, it ranged anywhere from $5 to $10 last time because we reserved it for so long. I think it was $10 per person, but we're going to try to whittle it down to $5. So if 10 people come, it'll be 7. If 15 people come, it'll be 5. So the more the people come, the cheaper it is. So for those of you who want to have a little activity, come tonight, 7:15. Call me. I put the address. Can you get the address one more time if you want to write down? Just text me real quick. If you don't have my text, come up to me right away. I'll give you the text anyhow, right? Is it on the newsletter? It may be not, right? So call me. It's Goran, Goran, Redmond's Indoor. It's in Redmond. There's a Bellevue office, but there's a Redmond one, okay? And then just FYI, you know how much we had fun with the golf tournament. I'm thinking of right now planning, and actually no, not thinking. We are planning. We're just having to find the venue, and I found a couple places that have 6 nets, 6 courts outdoors, and also this place may be renting us their courts. We're going to have a pickleball tournament. For now, if you think, well, I don't know if I'm that good, so just trust me. We're going to have a youth pickleball tournament. We're going to have a couples tournament. We're going to have a different kind of themes. And so we're going to look forward to that news coming up. And then it'll be exciting times.
Awesome. Can we buy mulligans? Golf interest group, contact me if you're interested in doing that. A hiking interest group, I think something's going on today. Am I right, Kosuke? For tomorrow. Okay, there is an excursion tomorrow, so talk to Kosuke Takahashi if you want to join in on that. I don't know if Pastor is still doing table tennis while he's gone. There's a good chance not. But after he's back, if you want to get involved in that, talk to him and the guitar interest group as well. With that beautiful strumming behind me, you can be that guy to show up to the guitar interest group. So have a great week, and there is fellowship lunch today. It's pizza and salad, so enjoy.